Our society is made up of social institutions. We used to be run, according to Stanley Dietz, a communicative scholar who kind of created the theory of corporate colonization, by the church. That was the social institution that organized our lives. However, it then shifted to the corporation, where our 9-to-5 work schedule and our daily life was dictated by the corporate schedule. But our values and morals also were replaced by what was the most profitable, and that's what Stanley Dietz argues in his theory of communication, corporate colonization. And throughout this article, what he basically talks about is that because we become colonized, our institutions are being eroded. And as we individual began to matter less and less. What mattered instead was the shareholder and the corporation. Two key levels of analysis I want to look at here are first, looking at who owns our newspapers and our media sources today. And second, looking at agenda setting theory. First, there are 5 actual major corporations that own almost all of our media outlets in the United States. If you go into small little towns in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming, it's going to be owned by a major corporate umbrella if you actually look back in the chain of who owns it. And that's because they basically were able to go into these small towns and buy up failing local newspapers and then push their own agendas down that pipeline. So now you can actually play 100 different news stories in 100 different local news stations, and they all line up exactly with the news anchor saying the exact same thing at the exact same time. Because corporations have bought out the local news, and local public opinion has been colonized. But we can look at this through the communication lens of agenda setting theory. Agenda setting theory basically states that media outlets basically can promote their own agenda by the way that they actually promote stories, the way that they order them. When you go on the news, the first thing that you hear is going to be the most important, and the things that they spend less time on are things that we psychologically see as less important. And that's exactly what the news has done. And this whole article kind of talks about it. The major media is able to push a public opinion because they get to set the agenda, not only on MSNBC or Fox News, but in every local newspaper throughout the United States. So that's how you see small issues that were never a big deal before this last election get exploited. Like transgender athletes get exploited by the Republican Party for their own political gain, when in reality, in the grand scheme of things, this was never an issue beforehand and people didn't have an issue with it. They use it to polarize, spend a lot of time on it, and then make it a bigger issue than it is to hide the fact that our economy is failing. But to move on to the second point, there are some steps forward that we can take to solve this colonization of public opinion in the United States. This article was written in May 22nd of 2024, and what it talks about is that yes, our newspaper editorials have died, but now we have to do something about it. We saw that it played a major factor in this election, so we have to make a change. 2 key levels of analysis I want to engage in here is first, looking at how Trump is actually using this idea of a localized news source to push his own agenda. And second, looking at the theory of the communication theory of resilience. To start off, localized kind of a news is fake. We discovered that, and we discovered how it's basically majorly pushed by 5 people who own 5 corporations. But Donald Trump is pretending to be a populist and go into these areas and basically push his own agenda. What he's doing is using podcasts like Charlie Kirk's podcast and getting these different people out there to go talk to the people directly and pretend like it's a local news source. When in reality, it's not a local news source. Charlie Kirk talks to Donald Trump every single day. This just goes to show that there's kind of this massive colonization, and it's become extremely problematic. But there are some steps forward, and that's where we can analyze this through the communication theory of resilience. Patrice Buzzanel, a PhD from the University of South Florida, discusses in this communication theory of resilience that after a trigger event or some kind of thing that happens, there are ways that we respond to it. Now, one of those is basically affirming our identity anchors. And that's what the Democrats have to do if they want to fight back the death of the media and basically this colonization of media for harmful gains. What we can do is, as Democrats, affirm a solid identity anchor that allows to push a message that is not disjointed and allows to fight back against this abuse of media. So in today's editorial, we looked at the long, slow death of the newspaper editorial as promoted by Harvard. Now, this was before the election, but it did give a very important warning sign. We knew that newspapers have been colonized, and down the line, they've been misused by Republicans to push misinformation, especially in this election. But there are some steps forward. What we have to do is take back the narrative, come at it with a single line of communication, and fight back against the abuse. And how we do that is by affirming our identity